When I finally decided to pack up my life and leave the suffocating little neighborhood where I'd lived for nearly 20 years, I thought it would be simple. Just boxes, moving trucks, a forwarding address, and a bittersweet goodbye to the house I once thought would be my forever home. What I didn't expect was that my biggest obstacle wouldn't be the logistics of moving. It would be my HOA president, better known to everyone as Karen. Now, you've probably heard stories about HOA Karens before, but this one takes the cake. She wasn't just nosy or bossy. She was obsessive, territorial, and deeply convinced that the neighborhood was her personal kingdom. From the moment I put the for sale sign in my yard, I swear she treated it as though I had declared war on her. At first, she knocked on my door with her signature fake smile, the kind that shows all teeth but no warmth. "You'll need to submit the proper request to the HOA before moving out," she said sweetly, clutching her clipboard like it was an extension of her arm. So I laughed, thinking she was joking. "Karen, I don't need permission to leave. This isn't prison." She didn't laugh back. Instead, her eyes narrowed, and she scribbled something furiously on her clipboard before turning on her heel and stomping away. That should have been my first warning. The next few days were filled with constant interference. She stopped by the mover's truck and demanded to see their paperwork. She claimed the boxes on my porch were a violation of aesthetic policy. She even snapped photos of me carrying furniture, like she was building a case file for some bizarre HOA court that existed only in her imagination. My neighbors were embarrassed on my behalf, whispering apologies and shaking their heads, but no one dared stand up to her. Everyone knew that Karen thrived on intimidation. She had fined families for having basketball hoops, ordered holiday decorations taken down, and even sent threatening letters over lawn gnomes. But this time she had met her match. I wasn't some timid homeowner who'd bend under her authority. I was moving out, and there was nothing she could do to stop me. At least that's what I thought. By the third day of packing, her interference had escalated. She stood at the edge of my driveway, arms crossed, watching the movers like a hawk. "You know you're breaking the rules," she hissed when I walked over to grab another box. "The bylaws clearly state that all homeowners must submit relocation paperwork and wait for board approval." I stared at her in disbelief. "Karen, I don't need your permission to move. This is America. I sold my house. End of story." But she wasn't satisfied with that. She waved her clipboard in my face, pages rustling like a judge delivering a verdict. "We'll see about that," she muttered, storming off toward her house. That night I told my son about it over the phone. He lives out of state, and though I didn't go into much detail about what he does for work, I can tell you that he's not someone you want to mess with. I said, "You won't believe this woman. She's acting like she owns me, like I need to beg her to leave." He chuckled and said, "Don't worry, Mom, if she pushes too far. You know I'll handle it." His calm voice reassured me, though I had no idea just how soon I'd be calling him in. The breaking point came the next morning. I stepped outside to find Karen already waiting on my porch. She had her phone in hand, clearly filming me. "You're in violation," she announced loudly, as though she were addressing an audience. "I'm reporting you." I sighed, exasperated. "Karen, please just go home. I'm leaving. This won't even be your problem in a week." But her eyes glimmered with the thrill of battle. "Oh no," she said, tapping on her phone. "This is my neighborhood, and I won't let you disrespect the rules. I've already contacted the authorities." I froze. "Authorities? You called the police?" She smirked. "Of course. You're attempting to abandon your property without board approval. That's suspicious activity. For all I know, you could be committing fraud." My jaw dropped. Fraud? For moving out of my own house? I thought maybe she was bluffing, until I heard the unmistakable wail of sirens in the distance. My heart sank. She had really done it. She had actually called the cops because I didn't ask her permission to move. As I stood there on the porch, movers awkwardly watching from the driveway and neighbors peeking through blinds, I realized that this wasn't just about Karen being controlling. This was about power. She needed to prove she was in charge, and she was willing to drag the law into it. But what she didn't know, what made me smile despite the flashing lights growing nearer, was that she had just stepped into a battle she couldn't possibly win. Because if the police showed up and things got messy, I had one card to play that she couldn't imagine. My son wasn't just any ordinary man. He wasn't just someone who could calm things down. He was an FBI agent, and if Karen wanted a fight, well, she was about to get one on a much bigger stage than she ever expected. And as the police cruisers pulled into the neighborhood, with Karen standing proudly like she had conquered a kingdom, I couldn't help but think this was only the beginning. The flashing red and blue lights cut across the tidy cul-de-sac like a warning beacon, bouncing off manicured hedges and freshly painted shutters. For a neighborhood where the biggest excitement was usually the annual yard sale, the sight of two police cruisers pulling up to my driveway was a full-blown spectacle. Curtains twitched in every window. Porch doors cracked open. It felt like half the neighborhood was about to grab popcorn and settle in for the HOA drama show. And, of course, front and center was Karen. She strutted down the sidewalk with her clipboard clutched against her chest like a holy relic, lips pursed in smug victory. If she had a crown, she would have worn it. The first officer, a tall man with a tired expression, stepped out of his cruiser. His partner, younger and sharper, followed. They both looked at me, then at Karen, then at the moving truck in the driveway, as if trying to calculate what possible crime could warrant their presence. Before they could even speak, Karen swooped in. "Officers," she said in her sugary sweet voice that always cracked when she was too excited. "Thank goodness you're here. We have a serious situation. This homeowner is attempting to vacate the premises without HOA authorization. She's violating community bylaws, and I believe there may be fraudulent activity involved." The taller officer blinked, clearly thrown off. "Fraudulent activity? Ma'am, can you clarify?" Karen launched into a tirade about bylaws, board approvals, neighborhood integrity, and suspicious moving trucks. She waved her clipboard like it was a badge of authority, jabbing at random notes she had scribbled, as though they were legal evidence. The officers exchanged a look that said everything. This was not the emergency they had been expecting. I stepped forward, arms crossed. "Officers, I've sold my home. I'm moving out. That's all there is to it. There's nothing illegal happening here." Karen spun toward me, eyes blazing. "Don't lie. You didn't file the relocation paperwork. You didn't submit it for board approval. That means this move is unauthorized." The younger officer raised a brow. "Unauthorized? According to who?" Karen puffed up like a rooster. "According to me. I'm the HOA president. Nothing happens in this neighborhood without my say-so." There was a beat of silence before the taller officer sighed. "Ma'am, with all due respect, HOAs don't control whether people can sell their homes or move. That's not a police matter." Karen gasped as though he'd just insulted her personally. "Not a police matter? Heavens, of course it is. Don't you see? If she leaves without my permission, the neighborhood's entire structure collapses. We'll have chaos. Strangers moving in unchecked. Property values plummeting. It's criminal negligence." By now the movers had stopped working entirely, leaning against the truck and trying not to laugh. My next-door neighbor, Mrs. Jenkins, whispered loudly enough for everyone to hear, "Karen's lost it this time." But Karen, undeterred, doubled down. "Officers, I demand you make her stop this move immediately until the board can review her application." The younger officer rubbed the bridge of his nose. "Ma'am, we don't enforce HOA bylaws. Unless there's actual evidence of a crime, we can't intervene." That should have been the end of it. Any rational person would have backed down. But not Karen. She shifted gears, her voice rising to a theatrical pitch. "She's hostile. She's refusing to comply. She threatened me earlier when I came to inspect." Her eyes darted around as if looking for someone to back her up, but the neighbors avoided her gaze. Even the officers looked skeptical. I clenched my fists, forcing myself to stay calm. "That's not true. She's harassing me because I won't bow to her imaginary authority. I've done nothing wrong." The taller officer nodded slowly, clearly leaning in my favor. But Karen wasn't finished. "If you won't act," she snapped at the officers, "then I'll escalate this myself. I have friends on the county council. I'll call them. I'll call the mayor. I'll sue. This woman cannot leave without facing consequences." And then, with a dramatic flourish, she whipped out her phone and started dialing. The officers, exasperated, turned back to me. "Look," the older one said quietly, "we'll write this up as a civil dispute, but you're not under investigation and you can keep moving." He glanced at Karen, who was screeching into her phone a few feet away. "Frankly, I just ignore her. She doesn't have the authority she thinks she does." I exhaled in relief, but the damage was done. The entire neighborhood had seen me visited by the police, and Karen was already spinning her version of the story to anyone who would listen. Within an hour, she had marched door to door, clipboard in hand, telling neighbors that I was under official investigation and that the police had caught me attempting to skirt the law. By evening, I had 3 text messages from friends in the neighborhood asking if I was okay. The audacity of it all burned in my chest. She hadn't just embarrassed me, she had called the cops, lied to them, and then spread rumors about me. That night, sitting on the floor of my half-empty living room, I called my son. I tried to keep my voice light, but he heard the strain immediately. "What happened, Mom?" he asked. I explained everything. The cops, the accusations, the neighbors whispering. There was a pause on the line. Then his voice dropped into that steady, professional tone I'd only heard a few times before. "She called the police on you for moving out?" "Yes," I sighed. "And she's not stopping. She's spreading lies to the neighbors. She thinks she can control me even as I'm leaving." Another pause, then, "Don't worry. I'll be there tomorrow." My heart leapt. "You don't have to—" "I'm coming," he said firmly. It's time someone reminded her of what real authority looks like. The next morning, as I carried the last boxes into the truck, I saw Karen waiting again at the edge of my driveway, phone in hand, a sly smile on her face like she was preparing her next attack. What she didn't know was that today, she wasn't just going to face me. Today she was going to meet my son. The morning air was heavy with that stillness before a storm, though the weather was perfect. It wasn't the sky that was threatening. It was the woman standing smugly at the end of my driveway with her phone raised like a weapon. Karen was already whispering into the camera, narrating her fantasy version of events. Here she is again trying to sneak away. No approval, no paperwork. "It's all on record," she muttered loudly enough for the neighbors to hear. She turned her phone toward me and smirked. "Say hello to your evidence file." I ignored her, focusing on the movers, but my stomach twisted with irritation. Every time I thought this nightmare couldn't get worse, Karen found a new way to escalate. I was about to tell the movers to keep working when a familiar black SUV pulled into the neighborhood. It was my son. He stepped out wearing dark jeans, a crisp shirt, and that calm, confident expression that always made me feel safer. Karen, of course, pounced immediately. "And who's this?" she demanded, marching toward him like she was the gatekeeper of the entire street. "Are you with another moving company? Do you have authorization to be here? Because I can assure you no such request has been filed." She waved her clipboard in his face. My son raised an eyebrow but stayed polite. "I'm here to see my mother." "Is there a problem?" Karen scoffed, clearly annoyed that he wasn't intimidated. "Of course there's a problem. Your mother is in gross violation of HOA bylaws. She's attempting to move without approval. She's harassing board members, and she's endangering the property values of every family here. The police were already involved. This is a very serious matter." He tilted his head slightly, studying her the way he studied suspects in the stories he sometimes told me. Calm, steady, unreadable. "That's so?" he asked evenly. "Because from where I'm standing, it looks like she's just moving out of her own house." Karen's voice went shrill. "Don't you take that tone with me, young man. I'm the president of this community, and my authority is absolute. If you're helping her, then you're complicit in her violations. I could have you both removed." The movers, pretending to be busy, were barely holding in laughter. My son didn't flinch. "Removed by who?" he asked softly. Karen blinked. "By the board. By the police. By whoever I call. Don't test me." My son leaned in slightly, lowering his voice so only she and I could hear. "You've already tested the police once, haven't you? And they told you it wasn't a matter for them." Her face flushed crimson. "They didn't understand the seriousness of the situation. They dismissed it, but I won't let that stop me. This is my neighborhood, my rules. And if you think you can just waltz in here and undermine me, you've got another thing coming." I stepped forward, trying to diffuse the tension. "Karen, enough. I've sold the house. I'm moving. There's nothing you can do to stop it." But she ignored me, locking eyes with my son like she had found her new rival. "Who are you anyway?" "You don't live here. You have no authority." That's when he smiled, not a big smile, just the faintest curl of amusement. "You're right," he said calmly. "I don't live here. But authority, that's another story." Her eyes narrowed. What does that mean? He didn't answer right away. Instead, he walked past her toward the movers, checking in with them, shaking their hands, asking if they'd been harassed. The men chuckled and nodded toward Karen, and my son gave them a reassuring nod. He was already taking control of the situation without raising his voice. It was his way, steady, methodical, like a chess player positioning pieces before making the winning move. Karen, on the other hand, was unraveling. She followed him, sputtering. "Don't ignore me! I demand to know who you are and what authority you think you have here. You can't just come in and undermine the HOA. That's against the rules. It's trespassing. It's interference. It's criminal." By now, a small crowd of neighbors had gathered. Some leaned against fences, others stood with crossed arms. Most of them were clearly fed up with Karen, but too afraid to challenge her directly. Seeing her go head-to-head with my son was the best entertainment they'd had in years. One neighbor, Mr. Thompson, muttered, "Finally someone standing up to her." Another whispered, "I wonder who he is." Karen heard them and seized the opportunity to perform. She spun dramatically, raising her voice. "Ladies and gentlemen, we are witnessing a direct attack on our community. This outsider is undermining our bylaws, encouraging lawlessness, and assisting in unauthorized relocation. We must not allow this. We must protect our property values." The neighbors exchanged looks. A few rolled their eyes. Mrs. Jenkins shook her head and whispered loudly, "She's off her rocker." But Karen kept going, voice trembling with rage. "If the authorities won't act, then I will. I'll get a court order. I'll have her fined. I'll make sure your mother regrets ever crossing me." That was it. The last straw. I opened my mouth to snap back, but my son stepped between us. His tone was calm, but there was an edge now, a quiet authority that silenced the murmurs around us. "Karen, I think you've said enough." She froze, startled by his shift in demeanor. "Excuse me? You've harassed my mother. You've lied to the police. You've slandered her in front of her neighbors, and now you're making threats. Do you realize how serious that is?" Karen's mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water. She was used to shouting people down, not being confronted so directly. I'm just enforcing the rules," she stammered. He stepped closer, lowering his voice again. "No, you're abusing your position, and that stops today." The silence was thick. The neighbors leaned in. Karen's face twisted with anger and confusion. "You can't talk to me like that. Who do you think you are?" My son paused, studying her, letting the tension stretch just long enough. Then he said simply, "Someone who knows exactly how to deal with people who abuse authority." He didn't reveal who he was, not yet. But in that moment, everyone could feel the shift. The power dynamic had flipped. For the first time, Karen wasn't in control. And though she didn't know it yet, her little kingdom was about to come crashing down. The silence in the cul-de-sac felt heavy, like everyone was holding their breath. Karen's face twitched as she tried to regain her footing, still clutching her clipboard like a shield. My son stood tall, calm but commanding, and even though he hadn't raised his voice, the balance of power had already shifted. The neighbors could feel it. So could Karen. "Abuse of authority?" she repeated, her voice cracking. "That's ridiculous. I don't abuse anything. I enforce. I maintain order. Without me, this neighborhood would fall apart. I'm the only thing standing between structure and chaos." "Structure and chaos?" my son echoed softly, almost like he was testing her words. Then he tilted his head. "Tell me, Karen, does order require you to harass movers, call the police on innocent people, and spread lies about your neighbors? Or is that something else?" Karen bristled. "I don't harass. I protect. The bylaws state clearly that any homeowner intending to vacate must—" He held up a hand, cutting her off with surprising authority. "Enough with the bylaws. You keep waving that clipboard around like it's the Constitution, but it's not. It's a set of rules you're supposed to enforce fairly, not weaponize for your own power trip." The crowd murmured in agreement. Even the neighbors who normally avoided conflict were nodding. Mrs. Jenkins clapped once, muttering, "Finally, someone said it." Karen's eyes darted nervously to the neighbors. She wasn't used to losing their silent compliance. She raised her voice, desperate to reclaim her dominance. "Don't listen to him. He doesn't even live here. He doesn't know what he's talking about." He's just some outsider trying to undermine everything we've built. My son's lips curled into a faint smile, but it wasn't amusement. It was the kind of smile I'd seen him wear when someone dug themselves into a hole. "You know what's interesting about outsiders, Karen?" he said evenly. "They can see the truth more clearly, because they're not blinded by politics, gossip, or power games." Karen scoffed. "Truth, please." "The truth is your mother is breaking the rules, and I'm the only one brave enough to hold her accountable." My son stepped closer, lowering his voice just enough to force her to lean in. "The truth is you've crossed a line. You turned a neighborhood guideline into a personal crusade. You called law enforcement under false pretenses. You've misrepresented facts. Do you know what that's called?" Karen blinked rapidly, her confidence faltering. It's leadership." He shook his head slowly. "No, it's harassment. It's defamation. And if you keep pushing, it could even become something more serious, like filing false reports. Do you really want to explain to a judge why you wasted police resources on a vendetta against a woman moving out of her own house?" The crowd murmured again, louder this time. A few neighbors openly laughed. Karen's face turned scarlet. She gripped her clipboard so tightly her knuckles whitened. "You don't scare me," she hissed. "I've been running this HOA for 8 years. I've dealt with worse than you. I'll have your mother fined so heavily she'll regret ever trying to leave." "Fined?" My son arched a brow. "She already sold the house. The HOA has no authority over her once the sale is finalized." "You're bluffing. Again." Karen sputtered, flipping through her papers as if the right page might magically appear to back her up. "The bylaws, there has to be something. There's always something." But the neighbors were watching now, and instead of awe or obedience, what Karen saw in their faces was doubt. For the first time, her grip on the community was slipping, and she knew it. "Karen," my son said firmly, "this ends today. You're not going to harass my mother anymore. You're not going to harass the movers or the neighbors, or anyone else who doesn't fit into your little vision of control. Do I make myself clear?" His tone was calm but sharp, the kind of voice that cuts through excuses. Karen trembled with fury. You don't get to tell me what to do. You have no authority here, none." At that moment, the younger police officer from the day before drove slowly down the street. He must have been circling back to make sure the situation hadn't flared up again. When he spotted the small crowd, he parked and stepped out. "Everything all right here?" he asked. Karen pounced. "Officer!" "Thank goodness. This man is interfering with HOA business. He's trying to intimidate me and undermine community order." "Arrest him immediately!" The officer blinked, clearly confused. "Arrest him? For talking to you?" "Yes!" Karen shrieked. "He's threatening me. He's dangerous." The officer turned to my son, who remained perfectly calm. "Sir, is that true?" "No," my son replied simply. "I'm here with my mother, helping her move. Karen here seems to think she can control the process with her clipboard." "That's all," the officer sighed, rubbing his temple. He looked at Karen. "Ma'am, I told you yesterday. HOA disputes aren't police matters. Unless there's a real crime, we can't intervene. Calling us for this kind of thing again could get you into trouble." Karen's jaw dropped. "Trouble? Me? I'm the victim here." The officer glanced at my son again, and I noticed something subtle in his expression. Respect, recognition, almost like he sensed there was more to my son than met the eye. "You two take care," he said with a nod, then turned back to his cruiser. Karen was left sputtering. "This isn't over," she muttered. "You'll see. I'll make sure the entire board knows what you've done." But her voice had lost its strength. She could feel the crowd slipping away, the neighbors no longer nodding in silent agreement but whispering behind her back. My son didn't press further. He simply looked at her and said, "Be careful, Karen. You've been playing a game with no idea who you're up against." The words lingered in the air, cryptic and heavy. Karen frowned, uncertain, but she didn't respond. She clutched her clipboard tighter and stormed back to her house, slamming the door so hard the echo bounced down the block. The neighbors dispersed slowly, whispering to each other. Some gave me encouraging smiles. Others thanked my son under their breath. The cul-de-sac had shifted. Karen wasn't untouchable anymore. Inside, as we packed the last few boxes, I finally asked him quietly, "Why didn't you tell her who you are?" That would have shut her down completely. He gave me that same calm smile, because timing is everything. People like her? They don't learn from being told. They learn from being shown. And when the time comes, she'll learn exactly who she's dealing with. The promise in his voice sent chills down my spine. Karen thought this was a game of HOA power. She had no idea she had just picked a fight with someone who played on a whole different level. The following day, the neighborhood buzzed like a hive. Word spread quickly about the showdown in my driveway. For once, the whispers weren't against me, they were against Karen. Neighbors who once cowered at the sight of her clipboard were suddenly emboldened. I saw Mrs. Jenkins chatting with Mr. Thompson on the sidewalk, shaking her head. "Did you hear him shut her down? About time someone put her in her place." Thompson chuckled. "That guy's got guts." "Who is he anyway?" Karen, however, wasn't taking the shift lightly. I spotted her peering from behind her blinds that morning, her face a storm cloud of rage. She wasn't used to losing control, and it was clear she was planning something. My son had warned me, she won't stop. People like her never do. They push until someone forces them to stop. By noon, I found out just how far she was willing to push. The moving truck was nearly loaded when two unfamiliar cars pulled up. Out stepped three people dressed in business attire, carrying folders, and looking around with exaggerated authority. Karen trailed behind them, beaming like she had just summoned the cavalry. "Attention!" she barked, marching into my yard with her entourage. "This move is officially halted. These are members of the HOA Enforcement Committee, and we are here to conduct an emergency inspection. Until we have completed our review, you are not permitted to leave." The movers froze. I nearly laughed at the absurdity. An enforcement committee? Karen, you just made that up. But she wasn't backing down. "This is entirely within my rights as president. The bylaws allow for the formation of special committees. These are my committee members, and we are exercising our authority." She gestured grandly to the three individuals, who nodded stiffly like actors in a bad play. Before I could respond, my son stepped out of the house, carrying a box under one arm. He set it down slowly, then walked toward Karen with measured steps. "Done, enforcement committee?" he repeated, voice calm but edged with steel. "Yes," Karen snapped, "and unless you cooperate, I will file a civil suit against both you and your mother for obstructing HOA governance." The neighbors had gathered again, drawn by the commotion. I could see them whispering, some hiding smiles at the ridiculousness of Karen's latest stunt. My son, however, wasn't amused. He looked at the so-called committee, then back at Karen. "Let me ask you something," he said evenly. "Did you inform the entire board of this emergency committee?" Karen faltered. "I well know, but as president, I have the authority to act swiftly when necessary." He nodded. "And these individuals, are they elected members of the HOA?" Her jaw tightened. "They're volunteers. So random volunteers you picked up this morning?" He pressed. The neighbors chuckled. One of the committee members shifted uncomfortably. Karen's face turned beet red. "For this is a legitimate committee. You have no right to question it." That's when my son dropped his tone, sharp and precise. "Actually, I do. Because what you're doing here isn't just harassment anymore. It's impersonation of authority. It's abuse of power. And if you keep going, you'll be looking at real consequences. Legal ones." Karen's voice cracked. You don't scare me. You're just some cocky young man who thinks he knows better. But I know the law." My son paused, then stepped closer, his eyes locked on hers. He spoke low, so only she and those nearest could hear, though the weight of his words carried to the entire crowd. "Karen, you have no idea who you're talking to." She laughed nervously. "Oh, please. What are you, a lawyer? A wannabe cop?" He pulled a slim leather wallet from his back pocket, flicked it open, and held it up for her to see. The gold badge glinted in the sunlight. "To Special Agent," he said calmly. "Federal Bureau of Investigation." The effect was immediate. Karen's face drained of color. The crowd gasped. Mrs. Jenkins nearly dropped her cup of coffee. The movers exchanged wide-eyed looks. Even the fake committee members stepped back, suddenly unsure if they wanted to be associated with her charade. Karen stammered, You're joking." "That's fake." "You're bluffing!" But my son didn't flinch. He closed the wallet and slipped it back into his pocket. "I don't bluff. I've been letting you dig this hole for yourself, because I wanted you to see how ridiculous you've become. But now, You've crossed into territory that's not just petty, it's criminal. You've filed false police reports. You've attempted to obstruct lawful activity. You've fabricated committees to intimidate your neighbors. Do you realize how many laws you've bent in the last 48 hours? Karen's mouth opened, but no words came out. She looked around wildly, searching for support. But the neighbors had turned on her. One man shouted, "We're tired of you, Karen." Another added, "He's right. You've gone too far." My son continued, his voice steady, professional. "Here's what's going to happen. You're going to step back. You're going to stop harassing my mother, and you're going to start respecting the limits of your authority. If you don't, I will make it official, and I promise you the penalties won't be pretty." Karen's legs wobbled. Her clipboard slipped from her grasp, clattering to the ground. She bent to pick it up, but her hands shook so badly she dropped it again. Finally, she managed to mutter, You can't do this to me. I've given years to this neighborhood. I built this community." "No," my son said firmly. "The people who live here built this community. You just bullied them into silence. That ends now." The crowd erupted in murmurs of agreement. Some neighbors even clapped. Karen, overwhelmed, turned and fled to her house, slamming the door once again. But this time it wasn't the slam of power. It was the slam of defeat. As the neighbors dispersed, several came up to thank my son. Mr. Thompson shook his hand, saying, "Agent or not, you're the first person who's ever stood up to her and won." Mrs. Jenkins leaned toward me and whispered, "You must be proud. I always knew there was something different about him." Later, inside, I hugged my son tightly. "You didn't have to show your badge," I whispered. "You risked revealing too much." He smiled. "Sometimes you have to. People like her only understand power. But don't worry, I didn't say more than I needed to. She'll think twice before trying something like this again." I believed him. For the first time in years, I felt free. Not just from the house, but from the shadow Karen had cast over the neighborhood. But deep down, I suspected this wasn't the last we'd hear from her. And I was right. For a brief moment, peace settled over the street. The movers finished loading the truck without further interruptions. Neighbors waved and smiled at me, and even the air felt lighter without Karen's constant interference. I thought, perhaps naively, that the ordeal was finally behind us. But I underestimated just how far Karen would go when cornered. That night, long after the movers had left and the neighborhood had grown quiet, I sat with my son in the living room, surrounded by half-packed boxes. We were sipping tea, relieved the hardest part was over, when headlights swept across the curtains. A car screeched to a halt outside, followed by the sound of slamming doors, then pounding, heavy fists on the front door. Karen's voice bellowed from the porch. "Open up, this isn't over. You can't just run away from your obligations to the HOA." I froze. My son set his cup down calmly and stood. "She's losing it," he muttered. "Stay behind me." He opened the door. There was Karen, flanked by 2 uniformed police officers. Her hair was wild, her expression manic, and she clutched her infamous clipboard like a weapon. "Arrest them!" she shouted. "They're fleeing in violation of community codes. They're criminals!" The officers looked confused. One asked, "Ma'am, what exactly is the crime here?" Karen's face contorted with fury. "They moved without approval. They defied my authority. This man," she pointed at my son, "threatened me and impersonated law enforcement. I demand you take them into custody immediately." The officers exchanged doubtful glances. My son, however, didn't flinch. He pulled his badge again, flashing it just long enough for them to see clearly. "Special Agent FBI," he said firmly. "This woman has been filing false reports and wasting police resources. You've been dragged out here under false pretenses again," Karen shrieked. "He's lying. That badge is fake. He's a fraud." But the officers weren't buying it. One turned to her. "Ma'am, you've called us 3 times this week for nonsense. We've warned you before about abusing emergency services. That's because you're not doing your job," she screamed. "The HOA president's word is law. You're supposed to enforce it." The other officer shook his head. "That's not how the law works, ma'am." My son stepped forward, his tone measured but commanding. "Officers, I'll file a report with your department first thing in the morning. This woman has escalated her harassment to the point of impersonating authority and making false criminal accusations. If she keeps pushing, I'll escalate it to federal charges. Karen's confidence shattered like glass. Her voice cracked as she sputtered, You can't do this to me. I am the HOA, I keep this community running. Without me, everything falls apart." The neighbors, roused by the shouting, had begun to gather outside again. Curtains parted, doors opened, and soon a small crowd had assembled on lawns and driveways. Someone whispered, "She's at it again." Another muttered, "Unbelievable." One neighbor, Mr. Thompson, stepped forward and addressed the officers. "We've all had enough of her. She's been terrorizing this neighborhood for years, threatening fines, calling the cops for no reason, harassing anyone who doesn't bow to her rules. If anyone deserves to be removed, it's her." The officers looked at each other, clearly fed up. "Ma'am," one said to Karen, "this is your last warning. If you make another false report, you will be the one going to jail. Do you understand?" Karen's eyes darted around wildly. She seemed to realize for the first time that nobody was on her side anymore. The neighbors' glares burned holes into her pride. Even her so-called committee members from earlier were nowhere to be seen. She was utterly alone. Still, she made one final attempt to cling to power. She raised her clipboard high and shouted, "Fine! If the law won't help me, then I'll fine every single one of you. I'll double the fees, triple them. You'll all regret crossing me." But before she could continue, Mrs. Jenkins marched up, snatched the clipboard from Karen's hands and snapped it clean in two. The crowd gasped, then erupted into cheers. Karen's face twisted in horror. You can't do that. That's official property of the HOA." Mrs. Jenkins folded her arms. "Not anymore. You're done, Karen. We'll hold a vote first thing tomorrow and you'll be out of office for good." Karen spun in a circle, looking desperately for support, but all she saw were angry, defiant faces. Her empire of fear had crumbled in a single night. With a strangled cry, she stumbled back toward her house, tripping over the curb, before finally slamming her door shut. The officers left soon after, shaking their heads. The neighbors lingered a while, chatting excitedly about finally being free of Karen's tyranny. Some even came up to thank my son personally. One little boy tugged on his sleeve and asked, "Are you really an FBI agent?" My son knelt, smiled, and said, "I really am. But tonight, I'm just glad I could help my mom." Later, after the crowd dispersed, my son and I sat back down inside. I let out a long breath. "It's finally over." He gave me a look. "With Karen, it's never over. People like her always try to claw their way back. But the difference now is she's exposed. The neighbors won't fear her anymore. And if she ever tries this again, she'll answer to more than just the HOA. For the first time in years, I felt free. Free from the constant anxiety of living under Karen's scrutiny. Free from the endless rules and threats. Tomorrow we would drive away, leaving the chaos behind. But as I drifted off to sleep that night, one thought brought a smile to my face. Karen had finally met her match. And it wasn't just me. It was my son, the FBI agent, who turned her world upside down. The next morning, as we drove away, I glanced in the rearview mirror one last time. Karen stood in her yard, arms crossed, her kingdom of control reduced to rubble. She looked smaller somehow, powerless, and for the first time I didn't feel fear. I felt pity, because no matter how loudly she screamed or how hard she fought, the truth was undeniable. The neighborhood had moved on, and so had I.